time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, I'm your host, Jared Sebesta. I'm the co-founder of Retire Repurposed alongside Ben Tages. Thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe you're listening to us online. Maybe you found us on the radio. Regardless, head over to iTunes, find our podcast, click subscribe, and better yet, leave us a quick positive rating and review. If you just make a moment and do that, we would appreciate that so much. Now, this podcast is all about retirement, but it's not about money. It's about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career, maybe 30, 40, perhaps 50 plus years, saving for retirement, having a certain mindset, and then shutting it off on Retirement Friday without methodical steps to living what we call a repurposed retirement. If you want more for your life and your retirement, then you have come to the right place. Well, on this episode, we continue our series on retirement happiness. Society tells us that retirement is the time when we can truly live and be happy. But does retirement make good on that promise? And furthermore, what makes us happy in the first place? Well, today we talk about the time piece of the repurposed framework. Recently, a quote was posted online saying this, quote, "The recipe for unhappiness is having too much free time and avoiding work," end quote. In this podcast, we talk about how this statement relates to modern day retirement, and we explain how you can make sure your retirement doesn't become the biggest waste of time of your life. Enjoy this episode. All right, folks, welcome back to the show here today. We're so glad that you are joining us on the show. We've got a really important show. We are titling today's broadcast, "The Biggest Waste of Time." And if that gets your attention, that was the whole point. We've got a great show. We're going to start to talk about how you spend your time in retirement and how that leads back to your happiness. So again, we've got a great show on tap. And again, so thankful that you are joining us. Just a quick reminder, we've got a Facebook group called Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. This is just for you. It's a growing community of people that refuse to accept the typical American dream retirement. We've got the latest and greatest content, all the information. If you want to stay connected to us, our platform, the things that we talk about on the show here today, the best way to get plugged in is to be part of this private Facebook group, but you can join. Very easy. Just go to facebook.com and search Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. Click join to join this growing community of people that refuse to accept the typical American dream retirement. All right, let's get started with today's show. This is going to be we're going to spend some time and just kind of step back and look again at this view or this framework that we've been walking you through, maybe unknowingly as you've been listening to these shows for about the last 8 to 12 weeks or so. Ben Tages joins me on the show here today. And again, we're continuing this series on retirement happiness. We're going to introduce this idea of time. But really, before we get into that, I think it's important to really kind of lay the foundation again. Why is this whole series on retirement happiness so important?
Yeah, Jared, I think it is because this is a time of life that, as people, do get older into the, what society has typically said, the typical retirement ages, you're in your golden years, 60s, 70s, whatever, that if you're not careful, you can walk into a time where you start to have so many regrets. And I think that's what we're trying to make sure that people don't have, is as they walk into this season, it just completely eliminates the chance that someday you're going to look back on this season of life with regret.
Yeah, there was a book written by Nancy Ware. I think the first name is right. Last name is Ware, but she wrote about this idea. And I think she's Australian. We've mentioned her on the show, but her book was really all about life's regrets because she worked in basically hospice care. And one thing that she mentioned that was true across the board, the biggest regret that she saw amongst people, men and women, was that they were not true to themselves, and they maybe regretted not doing the thing, stepping into this fullness that maybe they felt called to because of a number of reasons. And that, to me, that's worst case scenario, where people get to the end of their lives, their physical health starts to deteriorate, and they look back wishing they had done it differently.
Yeah, and I've seen that, walking with retirees as they age. I've had the opportunity to visit with people and have relationships that spanned now a couple decades, and some of them, have passed on. And walking with them later on in their life and talking with them about, if there is a regret, Jared, it's interesting that you brought that book up, because I found the same thing. Walking with people that are in that stage of life, they tend to regret the things they did not do. It's like, it's not that I did something, it's what I did not do. And that's what we're trying to make sure, is that the people that are listening to this program are taking advantage and stewarding their time, their talent, their treasure, so that someday, and we're believers. I believe that someday you're going to have to give an accounting for what you've done with all three of those areas. So I want to make sure that I don't, get to that point where I'm nearing the end of my life and I just didn't do enough, or I have that feeling like I didn't do enough.
We talk about walking into fullness, and that may be kind of a spiritual term. At least it's in the spiritual context. I'll give my opinion, Ben, and I'd like to hear your opinion on this one. What does it mean to walk into fullness? And again, the way that I frame that up in my brain is that, there is a calling on everybody's life. There's a purpose on everybody's life. Yes, God uses all things, good and bad, for good. Yes, but there are legitimate consequences to our lives where we miss out on opportunities. And, can God redeem those? Yes. But again, I want to live my life now. I'm not retirement age. I'm 44 at the time of this recording, but I don't want to go through life, looking back and saying, gosh, I wish I would have done it differently. I wish I would have tried. I wish I wouldn't have let fear get in the way or had the audacity to try this and step into this. To me, that's what fullness is. Any thoughts on that or opinions on that?
Yeah, Jared, I think I did write about this in my book too. We talked about divine discontentment. Mm-hmm. I think that's what it is. I think Ralph Waldo Emerson talked about this. He explored the idea of being, what does it feel like to be in divine discontentment? And he says it's a state of knowing where really we're not walking into God's perfect plan for our lives, right? So when you feel that way, it doesn't mean that every single day you're waking up and like, oh, I know exactly where I'm supposed to be today. I've got everything dialed in. I'm walking into fullness. I've arrived, right? But you should at least be attempting to. You should at least be listening. You should be at least attempting to be and live where God wants you to be. So I think there's a perfect plan for all of our lives. And there's seasons where it doesn't feel like we're there, but what we're trying to do is get closer to walking into that fullness that God wants for us.
Yeah, and again, we believe, for those of you that are maybe new to the show, retirement can be that time where you can really step into that fullness. The result of that, in my opinion, would be there's fulfillment there. Yeah, we want you to be happy, and again, that's kind of the name of the series, but really there's a deeper reasoning behind we're spending so much time on this. Yes, we want you to be happy, but really it goes deeper than that. What are some maybe a deeper layers to that idea of fullness?
Yeah, Jared. Retirement should be just this perfect fit. And I don't think it needs to be either or. I think it should be fulfilling and rewarding. In fact, those things aren't exclusive at all. In fact, they're very much important to one another. You're not going to feel as if you can enjoy your life, and you're using this word happiness, like you said. Maybe it's more joy. It's lasting, but you cannot have that unless you're feeling fulfilled. So they're not mutually exclusive of one another, but you need them both, right? And I believe, and I know you do too, that retirement should be this time of greatest impact and legacy. I look at this word legacy. It's coming up a lot right now. I'm doing some planning with some clients that are working through more inheritance. Right, inheritance is the financial side. It's the money that someday your kids will spend. True legacy, that's the lasting impact on people. That's what we're after here. We're not looking at the other stuff is not important, but I know what really lasts, and that's the legacy piece, and that's your people impact.
Yeah, the people impact is so important, and also too, what America will feed, what the kind of the American dream facade will feed you is that now it's the end and your impact now goes away. And again, we just really feel so strongly against that. And we just fight that mindset so much on this show. And that's why we're spending so much time on it once again here today. So let's talk about this time, talent, treasure framework. You mentioned it, Ben, earlier in the show. And I even mentioned it as well. We've been kind of walking people down this path unknowingly for about the last 2 months or so, every week on the show. But time, talent, treasure. We started off this series spending about 6 or 7 episodes just dissecting the treasure piece. We talked about what is the best age. Can money actually buy happiness? In my opinion, I think one of the most important shows through that section was this idea of resolving the money disorder. Ben, talk about that just a little bit. What does that mean for people who maybe never heard that term?
Yeah, that show really was about, we're trying to talk to people that have plenty, right? In fact, sometimes what we find is when they have plenty and the mental real estate that is taken up by them worrying about money. Remember, a disorder implies that there's something in their thinking that shouldn't be there. An outside expert would look at them and say, well, you've got plenty, right? Because we can see those numbers. And they're going to be concerned and worried and spending so much time thinking about both their protecting their wealth, but also having enough income. When we can see that clearly it is a disorder because they have enough, it's more, they're just way too focused on it to get out of their own way.
I think you mentioned, again, there's two groups of people. There are people that maybe should be worried about money to some extent, making sure that they have enough, that they're going to have enough to live on, to have a legitimate financial plan. We're not suggesting that the financial plan is not important. You're talking about the people who have enough, but now they almost have an unhealthy relationship with it.
Yeah, I saw this quote once. It said, I didn't start a retirement account because I thought Jesus would have come back by now. I think some people get into this mindset of like, I don't need to worry about money. It'll take care of itself. This, when we're talking about money disorder, that is not what we're talking about. We definitely are talking to people who, again, have what we're going to say is enough. They shouldn't be worried about money, but yet they are.
Yep, exactly. We talked about antidotes to resolving that money disorder because that is kind of the first step in our process. We've got to get our mind in a healthy relationship with money. The Bible talks about money more than any other topic over 2,300 times. Again, not because money's bad, but if we have an unhealthy relationship or tie to it, and that could be anything, it becomes an idol. And so again, dissecting and resolving that money disorder is huge. Ways to address that, Ben, we talked about in the next show, one of which was wealth transfer plans. Another one I would say is generosity, extreme generosity. Talk about how that shifts the mindset of a retiree with their wealth.
Yeah, I think when you can realize that you don't own it, right? And when you can start to look at your wealth and your income as not yours, but that you are a steward, it really starts to change the game. I mean, if you can generosity breaks it, first of all, but just the feeling of a closed fist around a dollar bill versus an open hand, that open hand is so much more relaxing, and that's what we're after. So it's generosity, but also it's more of a freedom to spend what you want to spend, right, Jared. I think a lot of retirees get caught in that too. They're like, I don't know if I can spend this. And unfortunately, like we've seen many times in our business, if you don't spend it, your kids will. If you don't give it away, your kids will. So we want, if you earned it, you should be the one that's doing most of that spending, most of that giving. And the way that you free yourself up, that's what we talk about that show, is by having a budget that allows a retiree to spend. So if you can fix that financial side of it, man, it sets you up so much for even beginning to talk about your talent and beginning to talk about your time.
The word liberation came to mind as you were talking there. If you've done the due diligence, you've created wealth, and you have enough, this is what should set you free. The problem is when you have a money disorder, it actually keeps you in bondage, and this fear to spend, dominates you, and the fear to lose it. So again, not to beat a dead horse here, but go back, listen to those shows, understand this correct relationship with money. We talked about it as the first piece in the time, talent, treasure framework that we talked about. All right, so the last couple of shows, last 4 shows actually, we have talked about basically kind of the talent piece. This comes down to this idea of repurpose. It's the baseline theme of your book. It is a baseline theme in our class called Repurposed University. we felt that you have to identify the treasure piece first and then go to the talent piece, because now we have to understand really truly who we are. How would you kind of, give an overview or a recap of the last 4 shows?
Well, yeah, I think, again, once we have fixed that financial side, so we know your motives are right, and it's not about money now. It's about your talent and about who you are as a person, who God created you to be. That's what I love about retirees, is you're walking into a time where you can start to look at your experiences, figure out what abilities you have, right, and then figure out who you can best serve with those. And man, when you combine those 3 together, that is the ultimate trifecta. I mean, then you've got you're making impact with people, you're using your skills and talents, and you're also being able to apply all of the things that you've learned in a career of working or serving, whatever you've done. Mm-hmm. So that's really what the talent piece was all about.
Yeah, I think that's a great synopsis of that. We walked people through the whole continuum, or our process of really beginning with reflecting all the way down to identifying your who, which is what we talked about last week. If you have missed the last 10 to 15 shows, holy mackerel, I cannot encourage you enough to go back, listen, make sure you subscribe to our podcast, but listen to those shows. If you have the time, listen to them in order, because they walk you through this entire process all the way up to where we are here today. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the time piece. And again, I think it's really important to say, even though lots of times this could be the most important piece, we have to kind of end with it, because the other 2 have to kind of get addressed first. Ben, you've gotten in the habit more so in the last several years of talking about this with your clients and asking them flat out, of the 3 T's, time, talent, or treasure, which one is most important? And you've seen a lot of consistency with their answers.
Yeah, I have never, in the entire time doing that, had somebody come back with treasure as number 1. I've had a few people say, my talent, I mean, if I don't have talent, meaning the ability to enjoy things, the ability to think and create, then time isn't as important. So I get that, but it's never treasure. So most common, though, Jared, is people say it is my time. I think many of the people I meet with are 50 plus. Many of the people that you and I coach, they're 50 plus. So they're getting to that point. We're getting to that point, as we're both in our 40s, where time starts to really become the most important thing.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And again, as you get into your 40s, as we are, Ben, you start looking at your time totally differently. So I can understand why people would say that. So again, we titled today's show, The Biggest Waste of Time, as an introductory piece to this next little series within a series. And we're going to kick this off by discussing a quote that I saw online. And now I'm just going to preface this. I'm not going to name who said this quote, but I will say the quote was not directed at retirement, but I do want to spend some time and break this down. Here is the quote. It says, "The recipe for unhappiness is having too much free time and avoiding work." Now, again, that quote was not directed at retirement, but man, to me, when I read that, it resonated so deeply with this platform, because it does kind of say a lot of the things that we believe are rooted in lies with this kind of typical American dream retirement.
Yeah, Jared, I mean, another way I look at this is, if you could do, and a lot of retirees feel this way, if you could do whatever you want to every single day, would that be a good thing? And the answer there is, well, it depends on what those days look like. It depends on what you think you want, and if you really understand what's best for you, which most people today don't. They're going to look at it and they're going to say, well, clearly work isn't in that equation. Clearly going out and adding value isn't in the equation. It's going to look self-centered, right? So I think that is likely what the person who wrote that quote is talking about, because, again, if you've got a lot of free time and you're not directing that free time to both make a difference in somebody else's life around you, or to do something to accomplish something positive and good, it is 100% going to leave you unfulfilled and looking for something more.
We often say that, the way that retirement is framed today, it is rooted in lies. And we get a little kickback from that statement, but we believe that wholeheartedly. because this whole idea of retirement, the way it's framed today, is a relatively new idea. You could argue maybe 60 to 100 years or so. Certainly it's within the last century, the way that it is seen today. But I think you touched on it. I think one of those lies is that work is bad. Work is the problem. If I can eliminate work out of the life equation, I'm winning. And again, to go back to this quote, the less I'm working and the more I'm doing of little to nothing, the happier I will be. And that is just not the equation to get there.
Yeah, it's so false. I think for some people, work is the problem, but that's because they're in the wrong work. Right. So that would be another issue that you got to address, is getting back to what I'm doing for work, why I'm unfulfilled there. And look at, our friend Dan Miller, 48 Days to Work You Love would be a fantastic place to start. Look at what work you're doing, because that's probably why you feel it's bad. Well, I love going to work. I love coming here. In fact, do I love the days off more because I've been here? That's a whole other piece for sure. Yeah. Because I've done something, I've accomplished something, I've created, I've made a difference, I've served, whatever that looked like in that day. My days off are that much better. So really, work is not the problem. I think it's more how we look at work.
Yeah. What's interesting is that there's a lot of people who are younger, non-retirees or even pre-retirees, that listen to this show, and it doesn't shock me. It's a pleasant surprise. But I say, why do you like listening to our show? Because you're talking about life. And the truth is that the concepts that we're talking about to retirees apply to your working years. For you to be in right alignment with your time and your talent, your treasure, you need to be correctly aligned in those things while you're working. I think that's a really great point. If work is the problem for you, I think that you really need to reassess what kind of career you're in and how you're stewarding your talents even while you're working, because that's going to carry over into retirement as well.
Yeah, it is, Jared. And you can't just retire away from work. You have to retire to the next thing. Doesn't have to be immediate, right? There can be that time, we talk about that all the time, of rest, that Sabbath time where you're really taking that really it can start to look like just a break to decide what's next, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. But you can't just retire away from work to get away from creating and get away from the busyness of your schedule. Mm-hmm. You have to look at what's next. You have to maintain the part of life, which is creating. That's how God made us, is to work. Mm-hmm. Remember, there was work before the fall. Work looked different, right. But believe me, if you go back to the Word and you look at Genesis and you look at what was happening before sin entered the world, well, it's pretty clear. There was planting, there was naming of animals, there was both the creative work, there was the hard work, the physical work. Both were good in their own ways.
The recipe for unhappiness is having too much free time and avoiding work. That's the quote we're discussing. Again, there's lies in there. Let's kind of wrap up the show here over the next couple of minutes. What are the dangers if people fall into this trap of believing these lies and thinking that's what retirement's all about?
Well, I think we all lose, right? The person that's believing the lie loses because their life is not as full as it could be. We lose, next generation loses, because we don't get really that person pouring into our lives and making a difference in our communities. So everybody loses. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would also add to that, the world loses, and also too, again, going back to your point, you don't get a chance to walk into your fullness. You don't get a chance to really execute the fullness of your impact or your legacy. And worst case scenario, it starts to look selfish, which is just not how we're supposed to live. We've got about a minute left here. This was just kind of the tee up of this idea on time. Give people a little taste of some of the things we're going to talk about in the shows ahead.
Yeah, I think we had to kind of recap, the treasure and talent piece before getting into the time, because really what that part of the series gave us was the lens in which to make decisions for your time. So we know you only have so much time on this earth. Whether you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, 80s, there's a finite amount of time, and it is the most valuable thing. So making decisions about how you're going to go about your time is exactly what we're going to be covering. The granular stuff, like the day-to-day dominating your schedule stuff, we're going to be talking about that. The big picture stuff, the things that we should look for each week, each month, each year, we're going to talk about that. We're going to get very specific. But the reason that we waited till now to get to those like actual specifics is because what we've done so far is learn how do we look at our treasure, our money, then we look at how do we look at ourselves, our talents and abilities, by which we can form up, here's the lens at which I can make decisions through. And now you're deciding where are you going to spend your time and really making sure you're not wasting what could be the best years of your life.
Well, I sure hope you enjoyed this conversation as we dissected the biggest waste of time in retirement. If you'd like a copy of Ben's book, Repurposed, The Untold Story of Retirement in America, simply go to our website, retirerepurposed.com. Until next time, I'm Jared Sebesta. Remember, don't retire, become repurposed. We'll see you then.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.